Hey everybody, Werner here. Welcome or welcome back. Today we're going to be troubleshooting a consumer grade air compressor that is suffering from low pressure. We're going to go at it from two angles. We're going to look at some schematics I've drawn up and talk through the theory of the compressor, aka how does it work. And we're also going to get our hands dirty and do some wrenching on my compressor, which is having the problems. So sit back and let's get going. I want you all to remember that I'm just another yokel who is not educated nor a professional in what I'm doing here, and it's possible that if you rely on this video, you, your project, or the both of you might end up as a smoldering hunk of hammered dog shit. Please use common sense, be careful, and always protect your ears, eyes, face, body, and hands when doing this type of work. With that, let's keep on trucking. This video may contain peanuts. So when I try to turn it on, or when I do turn it on, um, like I said, pressure is not building. There's a little bit, maybe suction coming here. The gauges are still reading 0. I know there's enough oil, I can actually see it right here, and I changed it not all that long ago. Well, I guess we'll start by taking off this black plastic case. We've got 4 socket head set screws that hold this plastic cover on, and there's 2 here, and there are 2 uh, directly opposite of these initial 2. And as always, I'm going to use my little magnetic tray to hold the parts. I'm going to grab these ones in back here. I know you won't be able to see it, but you're not missing much. This is actually a new thing for me. I've never worked on a compressor before. Know how they work. I'm not too worried about it. I don't think there's that many things that can go wrong, actually. I looked in the manual, and it basically says excessive leaks in the system, a blown gasket, obstructed intake filter, broken reed valve, or a leaking regulator. So those are the things we're going to have to look at. So that just slid off the back. Sounds like it's making air.
Before we get out the chainsaw and the impact hammer to tear this thing apart, I'm going to spend some time talking about theory. How does an air compressor work and how do we troubleshoot it? And in this specific case, how do we troubleshoot it for the symptoms of low pressure? So I put together this schematic here primarily to help me initially understand what was going on. And while I thought I knew basically how an air compressor works, when I went to try to start explaining it, I realized that I was a little bit short in my understanding of certain components. So I'm glad I went through this process, and I think it'll be worthwhile to share this with you. In order to make this video more user friendly, I've made chapters that are very descriptive and specific. So if you're looking to find information about a specific component, like the pressure switch or the check valve, and also the theory versus the hands-on wrenching. Look below in the chapter tool, and you should be able to find what you're looking for and skip around very easily. And finally, I've made this schematic available for download, so look for the link in the description below. Okay, let's continue on. So uh, the schematic of the actual compressor is here on the left side, and there's a key on the right side describing certain aspects of the compressor. And keep in mind, this is for a basic consumer grade air compressor, something you buy at Lowe's or Home Depot or a big box store, although the details go across many different types of air compressors. This is just basically a generic air compressor setup. Now, there's a lot going on here in this schematic. So let's break things down by asking and answering the question, what does an air compressor do? Now, bear with me here. This will make sense, and we just want to make sure nobody gets left behind. We'll quickly get on to the more advanced concepts. So, what does an air compressor do? An air compressor takes air at atmospheric pressure and then forces it into a storage tank using some kind of a air pump system. Once the air is in the storage tank, the air is held there until it is needed by the tool that you would hook up to the air compressor. And before it releases the air to the line, it regulates or adjusts the pressure from the pressure in the air tank down to the pressure that is desired for your tool that you're using that is connected to the outlet line. Now, based on what I just said, I've broken this diagram up into three conceptual sections. The first section here in this lightest blue color is where air is taken from atmospheric pressure and pumped into the storage tank. So I'm calling this lightest blue area pump pressure. And in these lines, these lines are all under pressure from the air pump. The second stage in this medium blue color is where the air tank is located, and that's where air is stored in the compressor. I'm calling that tank pressure. And finally, this last section here in the darkest of blue is where the air has been regulated or adjusted down from the pressure in the air tank to the desired pressure to be used by the tool of the end user. And I'm calling that regulator pressure or exit pressure or tool pressure. Let's move on to this first section of the schematic, which again I've noted as pump pressure in this light colored blue. So what's going on here? We've got this pump and motor that are taking air from atmospheric pressure and forcing it into the air tank when the pressure switch tells it to do so. And how does that function? Well, it's an electronic motor that spins and it causes a piston to go up and down. And it operates as a two-stroke system. So when the piston is going down, air rushes into the empty cylinder. And then when the piston goes back up, air rushes out of that cylinder and into the next stage of the system. And the reed valves are what direct the air through the pump. Now, reed valves are very simple one-way valves that are actuated by air pressure. So when the piston goes down, essentially the low pressure pulls open the intake valve and pulls closed the exhaust valve. So air will come in through the intake valve, but nothing will happen with the exhaust valve. And then when the piston goes back up, the high pressure now in the system will push the intake reed valve closed so air can't escape that way. And it will open up the exhaust valve and allow pressure to escape into the next phase of the system. Now, reed valves can fail, and we'll look at them in more detail later on in the video. Now, the very first component in the system is actually the air filter. And the air filter's job is to keep out dust, dirt, flying insects, pterodactyls, etc., and make sure that the air going into the system is clean. Now, the air filter can get clogged up over time, and so what you need to do is open it up, take out the element, inspect it, clean it out if it's dirty, or replace it, and then put it back together. Now, the next component that we're going to talk about is the unloader valve. Um, the unloader valve isn't really part of the main compressor system. It's there to aid starting the pump and motor up. So the unloader valve releases built up pressure in this line immediately after the pump and motor. When the pressure switch stops sending electricity to the pump and motor, a mechanical lever actually moves and it engages a pin in the unloader valve. And when that pin is pushed in, it causes all the air in this line to drain. Uh, that happens each time the motor is shut off. And it makes a very recognizable sound like this. Let me know in the comment section whether before watching this video you knew that that sound was the unloader valve. Once the motor starts up again, it will not have to work initially against high pressure in the line. And so it's much easier for the pump and motor to begin pumping each time it's called upon by the pressure switch. The unloader valve, as far as I know, doesn't go bad very often, but it's another thing that you would want to take apart if you can, inspect it, clean it, or otherwise replace it. And the last component in the system that could have problems is the check valve. Now, the check valve is another one-way valve, and it allows air to move into the storage tank once this little piece here has been pressurized, but it doesn't allow air to come back out. It can fail in several ways. It can leak backwards. So if it does have a leak and causes air to go backwards through the system, that's a problem. And how would you notice that? Well, the next time the unloader valve is tripped when the motor is shut off, instead of hearing a short hiss as the air runs out of this line, you would hear a much longer hiss because not only would air be draining from this line, but it would also be draining from the storage tank and the rest of the system. Secondly, the check valve could fail if it didn't let air through and into the air tank. So what would you do in either of these situations? Pull the check valve. If it's serviceable, take it apart, look for some kind of debris stuck in the valve that's not allowing it to move through its entire motion. And perhaps that's causing it to either be stuck open or stuck closed.
Just take a look in the air cleaner and see if there's maybe a big, huge pigeon hiding in here. Kind of doubt it. Yeah, I mean, that looks just fine. No surprises there. Well, being a noob and all, I think I'm going to just check whether pressure is coming through at various stages. So first, let's see if I can just break this open here. This goes from the engine, the pump cylinder output, where it sends the air down to this check valve, and check valve allows the air to go into the tank, and also over to the pressure switch. Surprised that just sits on there like that. It doesn't seem right to me. Okay. Uh, that's those four holes that held that plastic cover on also secure the motor and the pump to the tank itself. So that's why it's moving around so much. Okay, so now that I've got this guy off, I'm just going to plug it back in, turn it on, and see if air starts coming out of this outlet here. Yeah. Yeah, I would say we have lots of air coming out there. So problem is likely not in the pump or the motor itself. Now, I guess it's possible that the check valve could be malfunctioning, so that pressurized air is not making its way into the tank. So, yeah, I'll check that here in a moment. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this line that travels from the check valve over to the pressure switch. And then I'm going to try to unscrew this pressure valve. Actually, before I do that, just drain any remaining air. It is still holding air right now, so at least we know the pressure strips. The check valve is not letting air out. All right, she's empty. That was not too hard to turn. All right. I'm going to put this back on now. And then when I turn it on, I'm going to see where does air come out. All right, let's go. Okay, well, air is coming out of both of those. So it would appear that air is getting into the tank. I'm still feeling a little bit uncertain. I told you I'd never worked on one of these before. I'm not sure exactly how much air should be coming out. But it feels like air is coming out. It doesn't feel like that much air is going in on the intake side. I'm, so I'm wondering if something still might be going on up here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this check valve. Got some tape here, and let's see, we're going to install it by turning it this way. So we want the tail to be pointed this way at the end. So I think we want to wrap it this way. This stuff is always such a little bit of a trick. Alrighty, screw this back in. There we go. Okay. Then we're going to put this other tube back on. That a little tightening cramp. A little bit of a front, very little bit. Okay. Let's get this back on. Okay. All right. This is back together for now. So this part right here is the on and off switch, and also the pressure switch. So turns it on and off, but also it will allow the pump to pump up to the certain desired pressure, and then when it exceeds that. So here's the cover switch sitting behind the tank below the motor. And we see here, this is the unloader valve that we discussed earlier. I'm going to move the camera and come at it from a different angle and show you just a little bit more. And here's the pressure switch again from another angle, top obviously. And you can see this with this unloader valve. Do you see this little lever? There's a little lever under here. And right now it's set to on. I have it unplugged. When I turn it off, did you see that lever move up? Watch again. It's down. Now it's up. That is what happens. That's where it engages the pin on the unloader valve. So that the little pin is sitting right above that lever. And when that lever moves up, it depresses that pin. And that's when the unloader valve releases air from the line so that the pump can start up easily the next time. Oh, and I should mention also, on this unit, you can't buy the unloader valve separate from the pressure switch. So if you figure out that the problem is the unloader valve, you're going to end up buying a new pressure switch with a new unloader valve on it. And here's one final angle on this unloader valve. Right now, it's in the on position. The switch is on the on position, meaning that the pump is running, and except that I have it unplugged from the wall. And so the lever is not, this lever is not pressing on the pin in the unloader valve, so it's holding air. And once we shut it off and the lever moves up, that's when the air gets released from this unloader valve line so that it can start more easily next time. Got us refocused so we can see what's going on up top, because that's where we're going next. So I'm going to take this end off now. Yeah, that's me making motions trying to remember how to take this thing off. Just make sure I'm doing it the right way. Seems like it. There we go. Jeez Louise. Okay. And we need to take off, now that we've disconnected the air line from the head down to the tank, we'll go after these there's four socket head cap screws that keep the valve cover on. I say valve cover, thinking like it's a motor. I don't know if there's a different name for it since it has reed valves. Maybe not. One, two, three, and four. Actually, I didn't get this one all the way yet. There we go. All right, let's see what happens. Whoa, that was it. Um, well, I don't know. Okay, so we've got stuff going on here. Got one valve here, one valve here. All right, I'll have to take a look at this a little bit more and think about it. All right, I may have an idea of what's going on now. This is the intake reed valve on this side. And you see, here it is. See how it's pretty snug in place. It bounces back to where it's supposed to be. And it has a keeper on it. There's these two posts here, and there's this keeper that slides on and makes sure that this reed valve doesn't pop off. Now, if we zoom in on the one that's up on top of the valve cover, or up on the top of the head, this one is missing the valve keeper here. And the valve can just, this reed valve can just bounce around. So I guess one of the first things I could try is to replace that keeper. And depending on how much they cost, maybe I'll just replace both reed valves and both keepers, since I'm in here anyway. We're now at the point where we've identified the main problem, at least what we think is the main problem, and that's faulty reed valves. I'm going to cover the repair of this air compressor in a second video, so we can all see how I go about doing that. But for now, we're going to continue with the troubleshooting process. There's a few more components that we haven't looked at yet. And so let's continue on look at how to troubleshoot those so I don't leave you hungry for knowledge about how to do that. And then if you want to see how I actually made the repair, watch out for a second video that will be coming pretty soon.
We're going to go back to some theory now again and move on to the second stage of the air compressor. So this is this medium blue area. And there's only a couple of components here, really. The air tank, uh, the pressure switch, and we'll leave the tank pressure gauge until later when we talk about the regulator. The real brains of the air compressor is the pressure switch located here. And it has two jobs. Now, the first job is, again, in the case of a basic consumer grade air compressor, it acts as an on-off switch. So power comes in from the wall outlet or perhaps a more permanent connection and flows to the pressure switch. And when you walk over to your air compressor and flip the switch on, in most cases, you're going to be doing that on the pressure switch. Now, that doesn't mean that electricity is going to flow past the pressure switch at this point. Um, and that leads me to the second job of the pressure switch, and that is to send electricity to the pump at certain times. So in the case of this pump, uh, when pressure in this part of the system is at or below 90 psi, the pressure switch is going to send electricity over to the pump and motor, causing it to turn on and start pumping air into the storage tank. Once the pressure in the storage tank reaches 125 psi, and again, that's in the case of my compressor, the pressure switch will stop sending electricity over to the pump and motor, and therefore it will stop pumping air into the tank. Now, how could the pressure switch fail in a low pressure situation? Well, the most obvious thing I can think of is that it's not allowing the pump and motor to turn on. If we don't have pressure in the system and the pump and motor isn't pumping, that's a problem. And the pressure switch could have failed and is not sending electricity over to the pump and motor. The one other way that it would occur is that if it has a leak, if air is leaking out of the pressure switch somehow to atmospheric pressure, it will put a slow drain on the air tank. And how that would present itself would be cycling of the pump and motor. So air would leak out of the pressure switch until the pressure in the tank got below 90. Then the pressure switch would send electricity to the pump and motor. It would pump it back up to 125 and stop. And you would see that cycling over and over. Now, that kind of problem is not exclusive to the pressure switch. Any component here, just about, could have a leak, and we would see the exact same symptom with that cycling. With that in mind, how do you test for a leak? How do you find a leak in or on an air compressor? The easiest way I've found is to get a spray bottle and put some water in it and then add some dish soap or some other kind of soap so it's a little bit sudsy, and then spray that soapy water onto different parts of the compressor or where their fittings screw in or two pieces connect, and look for tiny air bubbles forming around the threads or at those junctions. And that will indicate that air is leaking out at that point.
So here's the cover switch sitting behind the tank below the motor. But from a distance, what you can see is whoops, a release valve, a manually operated release valve. We've got the on-off switch right here. And then we have power coming in from the wall, from the outlet. And the extension cord comes in from here and leads up to the black and the white wires here, and then these are the connectors that actually lead into the extension cord that goes to the motor. What else can we see? We've got two adjustments right here. Essentially, you can use those to reset the upper and lower bounds of pressure where you want the motor to start and stop, or the pump to start and stop. One of them raises the whole and lowers the whole band overall, and then the other one adjusts the difference between the two. And here's the pressure switch again from another angle. What can go wrong with this? Well, it could just not run. If this isn't working correctly, the machine won't run. It won't recognize the differentiation in pressure between what's in the tank and where it wants to be, and so it won't turn on. And the other thing that could happen are leaks. Again, just we've got a couple of fittings around here. Underneath, there's one too. That actually this hose here leads up to the regulator, and if any of those fittings have a leak, you'll see the pressure dropping slowly over time, and then when it reaches the low level of 90 psi or whatever the pressure switch is set at, it'll refill the tank. So that's pretty much what I believe could go wrong with the pressure switch.
We're at the last stage of troubleshooting and the last stage of the system, which is this darkest blue area, and I call that regulator pressure or tool pressure. And actually, it also, for my purposes, includes the regulator here. And the regulator is a valve, and essentially it allows you to adjust the pressure that's incoming, which is at tank pressure, so somewhere between 90 and 125, uh, and adjust it down to whatever pressure is desired for your tool. And you can check and see what the regulator pressure is by observing this gauge here. So you could look at the tank pressure, determine what the pressure is there, and then adjust this down. Now this pressure though will stay the same regardless of how much pressure is in the tank. The regulated pressure uh, can never be higher than the air tank pressure. So if this is at 100 psi, you could not set the regulator to 110 psi. The regulated pressure can only be at or below the pressure in the tank. So let's see how this works in practice.
All right, here we're looking at the pretty side of the regulator. So we have two gauges here. This is the gauge that tells you what the pressure is inside of the tank. The second gauge tells you what the regulated pressure is. And the regulated pressure is just adjusted by this knob. And you can set it to be whatever you want. You can take it all the way down to close to zero, but I'm just going to set it at 45 psi for right now. And notice that I've gone below 90 psi, but it hasn't tripped the pressure switch and hasn't turned the pump on, and that's because the tank pressure is still up at around 121 or 22 psi. And the last thing that we have are these two air outlets, and that's where you plug in your tools or your air line. Last but certainly not least, we're looking at the business side of the regulator and gauges. So the regulator really is just this piece right here. This is where that valve sits, and that's what adjusts the pressure from this side over here, which is the tank side, over to what you see in the gauge on the regulator side of the regulator knob. So air comes in this line here. This is from the pressure switch. Remember in the last clip we saw where the line was leaving the pressure switch and heading up to the regulator. It comes up here, pressurizes the gauge so that we know what the tank pressure is, runs through the regulator itself, and then we have the gauge here on the regulated side, and we have our two outlets. Now, in terms of what could go wrong, the regulator again could have a problem. It could get dirty. It could have a piece or of something in there that is keeping the valve from working in the appropriate way. And again, that's something that you can take apart, examine, and clean, or replace. Or you could have leaks at any of these fittings where the gauges plug in, where the outlets plug in, where the tank line from the pressure switch plugs in. And how would you know if you have a problem with the regulator? Well, you might have trouble using the knob to adjust the pressure to what you want it to be. So trouble setting the regulated side. You might see the pressure on the regulated side hunting, or going up and down and up and down, and not really settling on a specific number. I think other than that, it's probably going to be a leak. And again, the way to test for a leak is to get your spray bottle of soapy water, spray it on the fittings, and see if you find any bubbles forming around the fittings here, and that would tell you that a leak is present, and that's causing some problems. I'm going to wrap this video up here. I'm a little worn out today. It's 94 outside. I'm working out in my shop, which is not air conditioned, and I'm feeling a little bit beat down, but I'm happy that this video and this project are done. If you have any questions about what you saw, or you want to leave a comment, please do so in the area below. My channel is small enough that I can answer questions no problem, and I like helping people out, so don't hesitate if you're having a problem and you want to talk to somebody about it or get a second opinion. All right, well, there will be another video after this one which talks about the repair of this air compressor. We went through the whole troubleshooting here, but the next one coming up is going to be how I repaired it. So stay tuned for that one. So long for now. I always appreciate the interest, and there wouldn't be any YouTube without you.